guys, it's Kelly here, and I am back with another video for Honeybee Stamps. Today I am using the framed Anemone stamp set, and then its matching dies. Later on, I'm also going to bring in the Mr. and Mrs. stamps and dies. I actually was making this card. Well, first of all, the image is beautiful. It's drawn by my friend Emily Midget for Honeybee Stamps, and her floral images are always amazing. If you have not been over to the shop recently, they actually also just had their Autumn Splendor release. So all of their fall stuff, which is so super cute. But I am using the No Line ink, actually from Honeybee. This is one of my first times getting a chance to use it, and I am stamping on watercolor paper. My preferred is the, hold on, I'll remember the name of it. The what is it? It's the Monteval, but I can't remember like the actual brand name. Pregnancy brain is a real thing, y'all. Like, it's a real thing. What is the name of this watercolor paper? It'll be linked below. Check it out there. Because I cannot even remember what it is. Yeah, so that's where we're at with that. Alright, I paused it to look it up, which normally I wouldn't do, but my video was already being hinky. It's Canson. How hard is that to remember? It's Canson Watercolor Aquarelle, that the Monteval paper. That's the one that I typically buy and have good luck with. So, back to the actual card making. I also stamped my image 2 times. It was kind of difficult to get a good impression because watercolor paper is a little bit more textured. So I did stamp it twice, and then the watercolors that I'm using are Daniel Smith. You don't have to use Daniel Smith. I just like the way they blend on this particular paper. I'm not a watercolorist by trade, so it's really something that I just play around with every once in a while. And these are the ones that I have, so this is what I use. Just like there are some other times where like I'm traveling and it's easier to use different ones because I'm traveling, and so I use those. There's a lot of good ones out there. Use just whatever you have. As far as technique goes, we're going to start off where we're at regular speed, and I'll show you how I do it at regular speed, but then we're eventually going to have to speed it up because this whole card is watercolored, and that's why the video is so long, because I hate taking apart like any of it out because I don't know what it is that you're looking to see. You could own the set at home and be looking for a specific area in which you want help with how it should look, and then I've cut that part out. So I don't like to do that, but I do have to speed it up because watercolor takes a long time. Specifically for me, it takes a long time because it's not what I do by trade. I'm more Copics, and then I'm faster with those. So anywho, my technique for a super clean watercolor look is I like to go in with the pigment. I put it down where I want it to be the darkest. I rinse off my brush. I pick up clean water, and then I dab off the base of my bristles onto a napkin, paper towel, whatever. And that's why you can't see my paper towel on screen, but you can see me like bringing my brush over. That's what I'm doing. I'm just dabbing the bristles so that it's not too wet. And then I'm coming out and starting at the edge of whatever section I'm in, putting down the water and then taking it to the pigment and kind of pulling it back out. When I want it to be darker, I just go back in and drop in more pigment. If it has dried already, because I'm using such minimal water, I just re-wet it so I can drop my pigment in. This card ended up being, like, after I did it the first time, it was just too light. I didn't like how light it was. So I ended up going over it again, which is pretty common in watercoloring as far as building up layers of color and how you want them to look. So don't be surprised if it does take you a little bit of time, especially if you're just learning. For people who do it more often, I think it's just a comfort level. Like, they're more comfortable and they don't fidget as much with the things. I'm a little bit of a fidgeter. But for the flowers, the main two colors I used were quinacridone rose and quinacridone violet. I also did put in a little bit of blue on the second layer. And then what was that? Is it cobalt? My blue might be cobalt blue or Prussian. I'll look. Again, it'll be linked below. And so we're just going to go through, and if there's anywhere that you have like a specific question or whatever, like please let me know in the comments below, and I will try my best to answer that. Don't be discouraged with no-line watercoloring or no-line coloring in general. It can get a bit blobby, or feel like it gets a bit blobby, which can be a bit discouraging, because then you feel like, well, I have no idea what I'm doing and it looks like this and I'm just going to give up. Push through that. Push through the blobbiness. Because if you keep working it, and eventually when it's dry, you'll see at the end of each flower, like we go back in and put in like kind of the details back in. It really takes the blobbiness away and makes it a beautiful image. Also, if you're a person who likes a looser watercolor look, which I do, I do like a looser watercolor look. But somehow I always end up with like these super tight designs because I also like a really clean look. So sometimes it's just hard for me to combine the two, especially if I'm using a specific no-line ink. If you stamp in like a distress ink, like an antique linen, where it's also water soluble and the line disappears, it's much easier to get a looser look. So maybe the next time I watercolor, in 2 months or 6 months or whatever, because I don't stick with it pretty consistently. I don't stick with it. Though I guess maybe I'm more open to it in the fall months. I don't really know why. I will try to remember to do that so I could do a looser look, because my last few have been pretty clean. But this card is for my friend Angie. I've worked with Angie for years. When she first got hired as a dispatcher, she got hired as a part-timer. I actually trained her, which I had no idea why they even let me train anybody, because I had only been a dispatcher for 2 years. I had no clue what I was doing. That's not entirely true. I'm sure I had more of a clue than I felt like I did, but 2 years experienced dispatcher versus 17 years experienced dispatcher, I feel like I know so much more now than I did back then. But anywho, she's always been wonderful. She's always been just like the sweetest person ever. And I've never met anybody who was like, that Angela, I don't like her. I have never met a single person who did not like her, because she's just such a good, warm, kind human being. But so obviously she got hired when I was in my second year. So we've been together a long time. We have been together a super long time. And then she, at the time when she got hired, she was just part-time. And then she worked at a neurologist's office. That was her full-time job. And eventually she got on a department, not ours, but another department, full-time. But she stayed at ours part-time. Because nobody can ever leave that department. I don't really know why. I don't really know why. She's still there. And I'm still sometimes considering going back part-time. We just can't leave. I guess that says something about that particular department that everybody keeps going back. I don't really know. So she still works with my husband. And I see her all the time. But then she works part-time at that department. And she is the one who talked me into coming to my current department full-time. So I also work with her full-time at this department. Just now she has seniority over me because she got hired first. But over the years that we have been together, okay, and you know this if you have a friend, a girlfriend that you have been friends with for a super, super long time, we have been through a lot of relationships together. Different people that we have dated, different life scenarios. And so when I had met Ange, you ever have a friend who just, their picker's broken? Like, they just have a bad picker. It doesn't matter who they end up in a relationship with. They're just not, like, it's just not good. It's just not good. They don't end up in relationships with people who are very good to them. Which is wild because Angie is so nice and sweet. But she's got a bad picker. Her picker is broken. So when she first started working there, she had 2 boys. She still has 2 boys who are very sweet. And they're super into hockey. Both of her boys played hockey, which is a very expensive sport. And she was divorced from their father, who decided he was going to have some extra marital entertainment while she was pregnant with her second son. So there's the boo-boo pick number 1. Here we got to talk about the card. We're back to the detail layers. So now everything is dry. Okay, we've done 2 layers of color on this, and I'm much happier with the depth of color that I have. I'm going back in with the rose, which is pretty concentrated. I'm using really minimal water, and then I'm just adding in the details that are already there. These were already put in there by Emily. For some of them, I wanted to go back in and kind of soften them out because it was a section of the petal that would have been darker kind of all over. And so I just really used minimal water to go in and soften those edges. And then for the center, I am doing, is it lemon yellow? I think it is. A bright yellow, and then I'm adding in some gold and some brown. And just kind of moving that around and leaving it to dry while I move on to my next flower. We're going to go back and add in the details, but with watercolor, you have to be so patient, which is probably why I don't do it a lot, because I'm not very patient. You have to be so patient, because in order to add the next layer, it has to be dry. You can't go in there while it's still wet, just like you can't work in 2 areas that are wet next to each other, because they'll run together and just make this mushy, muddy mess, and we can't have that. So you just have to be patient. And maybe that is why I do less of the loose watercolor, because with this clean look, I use such minimal water that it's usually dry by the time I want to go back and do the next thing, and so I don't have to worry about it. That might be the allure there, honestly. But yeah, so that was the first bad pick. When she got hired, she was living, she was living with this guy, and they had been dating for quite a few years, but he was just like not super good to her, not super good to her kids. And she ended up like having to flee in the middle of the night with all of her items, just so like it wouldn't be a thing. And she had to leave her dog behind, and it was super sad. But then she was like in her own apartment and on her own 2 feet. We weren't dating anybody. There was quite a bit of time in between. And then she started dating this other guy. What are we going to call him? Derek. We'll call him Derek. And so then she started dating Derek, and he had kids that were a similar age to her own kids. And he was a very nice guy, and he was very good to her. His problem was that he was just not super cleanly. Like, she went over, like, she would go to his house and there would be no toilet paper. Like, where's the toilet paper? Even like the cheapest place I ever worked at had like that notebook style toilet paper that nobody wants to use, but they didn't have no toilet paper. Back to the card. So here I was putting in the detail parts, and I didn't really like it. I kind of got a little heavy handed. And so I just went back in with a little bit of water and went over the whole area, and just kind of like wiped them out. Watercolor is pretty forgiving when it comes to that. That if you don't like what you've done, or if you've put down too much pigment, you can totally blot it up, and just kind of give yourself a little bit of a blank canvas. That part of watercolor is totally wonderful. I debated on whether or not to leave this flower in, just because it's kind of showing you what I have already showed you in the flower up above. But I told you I had this fear of leaving something out, and like, that's the part I wanted to see, Kelly. So I leave it in and I have these extremely long videos. So I apologize. So yeah, he wasn't super cleanly. There was some issues. I'm pretty sure with the mother of his children that he was still like very much involved in her life. And I don't mean like, because me and my ex are pretty good at co-parenting. Like last week, Nathan's school started, we took him together to open house. We take him together trick-or-treating. We have had his birthday party together. Like, things that we do for our son. But I don't do for him as far as like things that don't involve my child. Not that, I mean, if he asked me, I guess I probably would, but he's not my person anymore. Do you know what I mean? He's not my go-to person. So if I need something, I'm not going to call him. I'm going to call Eric. Like, Eric is my person now. You know, he's my go-to. He's my ride or die. My ex-husband, I don't need anything from him. So anyway, he was quite involved with his ex as well, and not in a way like that was for their kids. Like, she was still using him as her person, if that makes sense. So that one was out. Then after that, we started dating another one. Who was he? Oh, we'll call him Brad. And she was dating him when her apartment burned down. If you guys have been in the craft world for quite some time, then you may remember that years and years ago, it's been years now, I had done a fundraiser, like, craft drive for a friend of mine whose apartment burned down. The apartment below her actually caught fire. And there was so much smoke and water damage from the fire department that there was nothing in the apartment that was salvageable. That was my same friend. Now, fortunately, everybody got out okay. She was able to grab the kids like baby books as she was on her way out the door, and all of their hockey gear was in the garage. But she is a crafter, like you and I are crafters, and she lost everything. So I had just reached out to some companies, put it out on my blog, reached out to some more, at the time, more popular crafters, and just asked them, like, hey, if you have anything you can give, if you have anything you can spare, like, she's lost all of her crafty stuff. And I know for me, because this is my outlet, this is my stress relief, like, I would just be devastated if I didn't have any of my crafty things. And of course, as usual, this community just totally stepped up and blew me away. I had so many things that people sent me. I tried to keep a running list so I could send thank you cards, and like, it was so overwhelming. Everybody was so wonderful. But during this time, like, she calls Brad to be like, hey, my apartment burned down last night, and the boys and I are sitting on the curb while the fire department is putting out our apartment. And he was like, oh my gosh, that's super unfortunate. Once he answered the phone, because he didn't answer, like, he didn't even call her back until like the following morning. And then he didn't even come out there. Like, he didn't even come to her apartment. I was like, dude, this is a red flag. Like, if your place of living burns to the ground and you're out there with the Red Cross getting underwear and toothbrush, and your person can't be bothered to come out there, like, that's a red flag. That's a problem. So then after him, there was, who was it? Now, mind you, this is like 20 years worth of dating, by the way. I don't mean to make it sound like she's just been dating a slew of people for very short periods of time. These were all long-term relationships. The last one, I think we're going to call him just Dude. Just Dude. That's what we're going to go with. He doesn't even earn a name. So, Dude and her worked for the same city but didn't work in the same building. And he had kind of been kind of like knocking at her door for quite a bit of time while she was dating other people and wasn't available. But he was always he wasn't like pushy or anything, but he was always like super nice, like would send her Happy Mother's Day texts and things like that. And so it just kind of naturally progressed from a friendship to them now seeing each other, which was all great and wonderful and good until, like, basically she found out he was just a huge liar. Like, years ago, I dated what I call a chameleon. I dated this man who, he was, like, super funny, and we were all into the same things, and we hung out and had all these things in common. And then when we broke up, it turned out that wasn't true. Like, he was only into those things because I was into those things. And then the next girl that he dated, he was into her things. And so you kind of have to, like, mourn the loss of this person who didn't really exist, because you didn't know that it was all a show. That's how dude was. And he was, like, talking to other women and Facebook messaging them and then lying to her face and then, like, borrowing money off of her and never, like, paying it back. It was all just very shady. So after dude, like, she's pretty much like, nope, done dating. I'm good. Thanks. A few years after that, she goes on a Catholic retreat, with her sister and her mom. And while she's down there, at this retreat where there's a bunch of talks and, different Bible studies and things like that, they meet this guy and his brother who were also there on the retreat. And it's not anything, it's totally platonic, like just making conversation. They just happen to be by each other's tables and things like that. And so while she is down there, they kind of make friends and they have dinner together, like, as a group. And then when they were getting ready to leave, she was going to, they had, like, I think it was, like, St. Christopher medals and St. Michael. And she was picking up some for some of the guys at work that she knew would appreciate them. And so she was waiting to have them blessed by the priest so that she could take them back. Well, in conversation now, with this new guy, his name is John, she finds out that he's a cop, which is so funny because, like, what are the chances that you are going to, as a dispatcher, you're going to meet somebody who is in your same, like, kind of field of work at this retreat that's not even, anywhere near your house. And she was like, well, I would have got you one if I had known. And he was like, no, like, it's fine, whatever. Well, they end up exchanging phone numbers and becoming friends. And then before you know it, like, that friendship blossoms into something else. But he lives in Pennsylvania. We live in Ohio. So for literally, like, the last 3 or 4 years, they have been driving back and forth to other states to see each other. And fortunately, John recently retired, so now he can move, like, because Angie's still working, can move to Cleveland, so that they can be together. And last weekend, this past weekend, was their wedding. So, like, just so happy for her. She finally found somebody who is wonderful and is good to her and is good to her boys and is just fantastic. And he's just a really good person, like, outside of, being a good husband or boyfriend or whatever. He's just a super good person. He's super involved in his church and, just wonderful guy. Could not be more happy for her. So this card is how we got on this long-winded topic. This card is for her wedding. And so I wanted to, watercolor does take a little bit longer, but I do think that is particularly beautiful medium. And so I wanted to make her something, first of all, because you always know your crafty friends will appreciate your crafty efforts more than anybody else. Like, there's nothing worse than making a card for somebody and handing it to them and them opening it, glancing at it, and being like, okay, thanks, bye, and then pitching it in the trash. Like, 2 hours of my life is in that can. Like, dude, you can't just throw away a handmade card. It's horrific. And if you're going to do that, at least wait until I'm out the door. But, like, I knew she would appreciate it. And so I wanted her to have something that she could keep. So that is how I ended up with the watercoloring, plus this framed anemone. You guys know I love florals. Like, this really just spoke to me and kind of drew me in. Big, bold florals, I'm here for it. I mean, anytime, really, night or day, I'm here for the big, bold florals. And I like things framed in. I know not everybody does, and that's totally cool. If you chose to use this image, you could absolutely ink up the flowers and then just use a baby wipe to wipe away the lines so that you didn't stamp the lines. Or you could use it as like I have done here, where I've stamped it in the no line coloring, and then you could just color, like you could paint over the lines, and kind of make them disappear that way. But I love a framed image. I am here for it. So then afterward, I'm going to show you how I ended up framing it in, since I did stamp in the no line coloring ink. But yeah, her wedding was, the ceremony, I thought was closed, but then it ended up, because of COVID, I thought it was closed, but then it ended up being up open. But by that time, like, we would have had to have made arrangements for Peanut, and we didn't really have time to do that. So we ended up going to her little, it was like a cute little reception that they were having at the hotel downtown, and it was just kind of like open bar with drinks, and so we stopped in and got to see them, and then Eric and I had our own little like date night after we left there. Here, doing the same thing with the detail on the leaves, just going back in and kind of following the guidelines that Emily has drawn in there for us. At this point, pretty much everything is dry, outside of the little lines that I just put right back in there. But I was super happy with the way that it came out. I loved the colors. I just think it's super bold and vibrant and very fall-ish. So now that all of the painting is done, I'm going to go in with my T-square ruler and a pen. Now, all the ones I have are Copic safe just because I use Copics more often. But you could really use anything that you wanted as long as it wasn't water-based. And then I'm just going to use my ruler to go back over those lines and outline them in black, because that's also what I'm going to do my sentiment in. So just going to go through those. Here's that Mr. and Mrs. die I was telling you about that I'm going to use in combination with the framed anemones. Congrats. And then I'm just going to stamp them in black on white. This is Nina. This is not the watercolor cardstock. I didn't really feel like it needed to be on the watercolor cardstock. If you're a stickler about your colors matching, your cardstock colors matching, obviously feel free to stamp them, but I thought I would get a smoother result on the Nina, and the color wasn't so far off that it bothered me, mostly because of how I placed the sentiment. A lot of it is over top of the painting, so it isn't like an obvious contrast. I'm going to use the matching dies to go ahead and cut these out, and I just hold them in place with purple tape. So far, I mean, I just, when I use it right off the roll, I sometimes have a little bit of issues, but for the most part, once it's used once, I'm fine with it, and then I just have them kind of like stuck to the side of my desk, so I reuse them multiple times. Once I had everything cut out, I did play around with it off camera for quite a bit to figure out where I wanted to put my sentiments. This ended up making the most sense to me, even though it covered up some of the painting. I just didn't like it up top. It just didn't, I didn't like it. So all of these got popped up on foam, just the regular Scotch foam tape, and then adhered to the card. I did not put any sparkle on here because it would have moved my pigment around, but I'm still happy with the way the card came out. So this is it. Thank you guys so much for joining me. I hope that you learned a little bit about watercolor paper and had a little bit of story time, and I will catch you on the next video. Bye.